I'm Dr. Cécile Coscuduela. Welcome to this ESL video on English grammar and more precisely on the English verb equation. So the English verb equation is the topic of the first book in a series of 3 books. So the first book here, as you can see, in a series of 3 different books. So this series has been called the Verb Triad books. The first one is the Verb Equation, and then the second one is the English Verb Formulas. And the verb formulas are actually the means to use the verb equation. So that you can get all your verb forms right. And then the third book is the English Verb Matrix, which is, so the verb matrix is a 1-page document which shows how to go from the different operators in the verb equation to all the verb forms that a verb can take in English. So on this 1-page document, you can see all the different tenses that exist in English, as well as how to use the passive voice and how to add a modal in your verb form. So this is actually a very comprehensive view of all the forms that a verb can take in English, and at the same time it's really easy because it starts from a very limited number of operators and it shows you how to combine them, which is simple, and how to come up with all the different forms that are possible. In this video we're presenting, I'm going to present the verb equation to you, and this video follows another video in which we have already done some work on the different verb operators that exist in English and that can be used to give a form to a verb. So if you haven't watched that video yet, you should do it. You should work on that video and see what are the different operators that can be used and their symbols here. And you'll see that in that video we make it really clear how important it is to use those verb symbols. For instance, if you talk about modals, it's really not the same as if you talk about modal plus V0, because if you use the symbol, then chances are you're going to remember that you need to check you have put a verb base right after the modal. Okay, so it's really simple and very efficient. As regards the meaning of those operators, the meaning will be presented later on, and in this video we're focusing on how to create the different verb forms that exist in English. So basically, I want to make a sentence in English and I need to put a verb in it. So how do I give a form to a verb that I want to put in a sentence in English? Well, basically, you need to follow a process that is always the same, and that consists of 6 different steps. So the first step is to ask yourself, do I use the present tense or do I use the past tense? Okay, so we're here. The first step is, do I use the present tense VS or do I use the past tense VED? These operators are going to be called the blue operators, or operators of firstness, because the present work draws a lot on the semiotics of Charles Peirce, and in his view there are 3 different categories, and the category of firstness is the category of what exists in itself regardless of anything else. And that's exactly the mode of being of these 2 tenses here. they are to be used regardless of whether other operators are going to be combined with them or not. Also, I should point out quickly that the present and the past tense are regarded by a number of linguists as the only two tenses that exist in English. We will come back to that point a little bit later and say that it depends really on the meaning that you give to the word tense. Okay, so anytime anyone wants to give a form to a verb, the first question that you ask yourself consciously or unconsciously is, do I use the present tense or the past tense? So you choose one of them and then you go on to the second step, which is, do I use a modal or not? Okay, so do I use modal plus V0 or do I not use modal plus V0? And 0 here is a symbol that linguists borrowed from mathematicians in order to refer to the absence of whatever is being discussed. So here, either I use a modal or I don't. The third choice that I have to make to give a form to a verb is I need to choose whether I use the perfect or not. Okay, do I use have plus VN or not? And then the fourth choice is, do I use be plus VING or not? And this 0 here is so important that it has a name. The first two, to my knowledge, do not have a name. It's just the absence of a modal and the absence of the perfect. And here, the absence of be plus VING does have a name. So this is the be plus VING form. And this is, I'll let you think about it and we'll answer that question later on in this video. And then choice number 5, I ask myself, do I use the passive voice or not? Do I use be plus VEN or not? So what's the opposite of the passive voice? Well, that is the active voice. So again, this 0 here does have a name. This is the symbol for the passive voice, and 0 here refers to the active voice, which is the default voice, really. So these 4 operators are the red operators. I'll come back to that in a minute. And the 6th choice that we make anytime we give a form to a verb is, do I use do plus V0 or do I not use it? Okay, so 3 types of operators, 3 different colors. And so do plus V0 here can be regarded as the green operator or the operator of secondness. Secondness in semiotics being the category of opposition. And do plus V0 is the operator that you use when you want to create different types of sentences. So the basic sentence type is the positive declarative sentence, and all the other types of sentences oppose this one and are created with do plus V0, the green operator. And then the red operators, there are 4 of them here, as you can see, and they're called the red operators, but actually they also need to be distinguished one from the other. So as you can see, this is rather violet and pink and red and orange, but basically let's agree that these are all the red operators and they constitute the 3rd category of verb operators. So the red operators are the operators of thirdness in semiotic terms. meaning that they are used to express the idea of a relationship to something else, to a third. And in this case, these operators add something more to the meaning, to the basic meaning of the verb. They add a viewpoint, they add a voice, they add an aspect. So they add something that sheds light on the relationship that the speaker has to whatever he or she is expressing. Okay, so 3 main categories of verb operators, and all of them always appear in the same order, which enables us to say that they constitute the English verb equation. Okay, so a very simple series of 6 couples of operators that are always inherent in the creation of any verb form. Okay? So the English verb equation that you need to keep in mind in order to make sure that the verb form you create is correct, because either it corresponds to the equation or you need to make it correspond to the equation in order for that verb form to be correct. Let's have a look at a few basic rules that need to be respected when using the verb equation to give a form to a verb. So we have already mentioned a few of them. First and foremost, when you conjugate a verb, when you give a form to a verb, you necessarily use either the present tense or the past tense. So it is compulsory to use one of the 2 blue operators or operators of firstness. And then the green operator or operator of secondness is used to produce the different kinds of sentences, not the basic one, not the positive declarative sentence, but all the other sentence types that can be opposed to it. And the green operator is not compulsory, obviously, it's optional. And let's say we choose to use the green operator with the present tense. So let's take an example. So for instance, we could have the Prime Minister does do interviews on the web. So this is not a positive declarative sentence, because it does use operator do plus V0, which never appears in a positive declarative sentence in the basic sentence, but which is used to create all the other types of sentences. And here we can see that we have the present tense of the operator do plus V0, here the infinitive of the verb do. Let's take another example. Let's say we want to make a positive interrogative sentence. So you remember I have already mentioned how important it is in other videos. You remember that it is key for you, if you want to improve your English, to be very active and to answer the questions and make the translations before you can see them in the video. And obviously, if you're a teacher, it is really important to get your students to be active, for them to improve their English. So the positive interrogative sentence here will be, does the Prime Minister do interviews on the web? Okay, let's take another example. Let's say instead of the present tense, we want to use the past tense with the green operator again, do plus V0. So in this case, the operator is not in the present tense anymore, it's in the past tense. The Prime Minister did do interviews on the web. So that's, again, the past tense of operator do plus V0, here the verb base of the verb do. How about the positive interrogative sentence? What would that be? Did the Prime Minister do interviews on the web? And again, we find the same structure, the same formula. The past tense here of operator do plus V0, the verb base of the verb do. Okay, let's go on to the next rule. So as we have said, only the blue operators or operators of firstness are compulsory when conjugating a verb. All the other ones are optional. So the green one is optional and the red ones are optional. And it is possible to use any one of the four operators. So I can choose to use a modal and not the other three, or be plus VING and not the other three. And I can choose to use so 1, 2, 3, or all of the four red operators, or operators of thirdness, sorry. Thirdness indeed. So let's take examples. Let's say I want to make a sentence with the present tense and modal plus V0. None of the other red operators, and obviously since I have a red one here, I can't use the green one. Okay, so to remember what modals are, maybe you could pause the video and write an exhaustive list of modals in English before you have a look at this one. So modals are operators that are used by speakers in order to express their personal opinion. The formula, you remember, is modal plus V0. That is key for you to make sure you have used a verb base and infinitive right after the modal, and modals can be used either in the present tense or in the past tense. So this is an exhaustive list here. Modals in the present tense are may, can, shall, will, must, need, and dare. And in the past tense, they take the following forms: might, could, should, would, must, need, and dare. So as you can see, the last three have the same form in the present tense and in the past tense. And also, let's point out quickly that need and dare can be either operators, so modals, or verbs. And also, these two are not very common. One last point, make sure you pronounced the OULD sequence correctly. The L is never heard, so could, should, would is the correct pronunciation. Also important to point out is the fact that will is a modal in the present tense. And this modal is used to express the idea of probability. And of course, when you say that something is probable, it means that it will probably happen in the future. Hence the confusion between the idea of something that is future and something that is probable. But it is really important to realize that will is not the future, contrary to what many students think. And will, and there is actually no future tense in English. There's only the present tense and the past tense. And will, again, I'm repeating myself, is a modal in the present tense. So let's say we want to use this modal in the same example as the previous one. So let's start with the Prime Minister as our subject, and then we want the present tense of the modal will, which is will. And then we want the verb base because it's modal plus verb base plus V0. So in this case, the example will be the Prime Minister will do interviews on the web. Let's also take another example, this time the positive interrogative sentence. So that will be, so yes, actually the point here, we have said that the green operator is used to create all the different types of sentences starting or opposing the positive declarative sentence. And we have also said that the green operator and the red operators are not compatible. So as soon as there is a red operator in the sentence, the red operator is the one that is used to make the different types of sentences. So that's what will happen here. The question here will start with the modal. Will the Prime Minister do interviews on the web? Let's now make things a little bit more complex. Let us add have plus VEN to the formula. So we want the present tense of the modal. So let's say we're keeping the same example. So that's the Prime Minister will, and then the verb base of have will have, and then the past participle of the verb do. The Prime Minister will have done interviews on the web. Okay? How about the positive interrogative sentence? Well, in that case, it will be, will the Prime Minister have done interviews on the web? So again, as soon as there is a red operator here, a red operator, it is the first of the red operators that appear in the formula that is used to create the different types of sentences. Maybe this would appear more clearly if we use different colors. So blue for the present tense of the modal here, will, and then the verb base of have in violet here, and then the past participle of the verb do in red here, done, will have done. Okay, let's complexify a little bit. Let's add be plus VING in the formula. So in this case, the Prime Minister, the present tense of will, so that the Prime Minister will, the verb base of have, the Prime Minister will have, and then the past participle of be, the will be been, so the Prime Minister will have been, and the present participle of the verb do, the Prime Minister will have been doing interviews on the web. How about the positive interrogative sentence? Will the Prime Minister have been doing interviews on the web? Okay, we're now reaching the most complex kind of verb forms that can be found in English. Let's add the passive voice to our formula here. So you remember traditionally the example that is given to explain the basic difference between active voice sentences and passive voice sentences is the following. In the active voice, we can say the cat eats the mouse, and then in the passive voice, the mouse is eaten by the cat. So you can see that the object of the active sentence becomes the subject of the passive voice sentence. So here, interviews is going to be the subject of the passive voice sentence that we're going to make together. So interviews, and then we want the present tense of the modal. Interviews will, the verb base of have, will have, the past participle of be, will have been, and the present participle of be, being, and the past participle of the verb do interviews will have been being done on the web by the Prime Minister. Okay, so you can add the agent and introduce it with the preposition by. Let's make the positive interrogative sentence. And again, we'll use the first of the red operators to create that sentence. And it will go, will interviews have been being done on the web by the Prime Minister? Okay, so we have, this is actually the most complex verb form you can find in English. And with the verb equation, you can isolate the operators that are combined to create that form. And you can see there's a very limited number of operators, and the rules to combine them are very basic, so you will remember them in no time with a little practice. And that ensures that you will be able to create only correct verb forms. So let's write down a few more rules. We have said that the blue operators are compulsory. Anytime you create a verb form, it is either conjugated in the present tense or in the past tense, and then all the other operators are optional. So the red ones and the green one are optional, and also really key to remember, keep in mind the green operator or operator of secondness is not compatible with the red operators, with any of the red operators. So they are mutually exclusive. Another important point that we have already made is the fact that these operators always appear in the same order, which is what makes the equation possible, because it's always the same symbols, the same operators that always appear in the same order. And as you can see, in the equation, there are lots of V places. Actually, there are 6 V places. And obviously, in a verb group or a verb phrase, that's the same thing basically, there is only one verb. And that one verb always appears in the last V place in the formula. And maybe one last point. Yes, all the extra V places are filled with the operator that follows in the equation. That's actually, these are rules we have been following when giving examples earlier. Let's give another example to make sure this is clear. So let's say I want to use the present tense, VS, and the perfect. Have plus VEN. So in this case, I have 2 V places. I have one V place here, and I have another V place here. So I know that I want to create only one verb group, meaning there's only one verb in it, and it's going to be in the last V place here, and the other V place is going to be filled with the operator that follows in the equation. So if we want to give an example to apply that, that would be the Prime Minister, and then I want the present tense of have. So the Prime Minister, this is the third person singular, the Prime Minister has. And then the past participle of the verb do, the Prime Minister has done interviews on the web. Let's make sure you're getting more and more familiar with these formulas that are all comprised in the verb equation. Let's make an interrogative, a positive interrogative sentence. In this case, that would be, has the Prime Minister done interviews on the web? Because as you remember, you used the first red operator to create the different types of sentences. Let's give another example with this time not the present tense but the past tense and no modal, no perfect, and let's use be plus V-ing. So not the simple form but the be plus V-ing form, and in this case the Prime Minister, the past tense of be, the Prime Minister was, and the V-ing form of the verb do, the Prime Minister was doing interviews on the web. How about the positive interrogative sentence? That would be was, whoops, there's something funny here, sorry about that, was the Prime Minister doing interviews on the web. Okay, so maybe one last example in which we are actually going to use all the operators that can be used to create tenses, verb tenses in English, because it is important to point out that the verb equation is actually very complete and not all the operators are used to create verb tenses. Modals are not part of the basic verb tenses in English. They can be added to them, which is what we will do in the verb matrix, but they're not part of the tenses really. And neither is or are the voices. The passive voice and the active voice are not part of the tenses in English. And do plus V0 is not either, because it's only added when we create different types of sentences. So that leads us to conclude that in order to create all the tenses that exist in English, we need to use only these three couples, these three pairs of operators. So the pair number one, VS or VED, and then here operators number 3, have plus VEN basically, or its absence, and then operators number 4, the be plus VING form or the simple form. So with these three sets of operators, we're going to create all the tenses that exist in English. Let us just give an example of the most complex tense that can be created in English. So the Prime Minister, and then let's add the present tense of have. So the Prime Minister, third person singular, the Prime Minister has, and then the past tense, the past participle of be, the Prime Minister has been, and then the VING, the present participle form of the verb do. So the Prime Minister has been doing interviews on the web. How about the positive interrogative sentence? That will be, has the Prime Minister been doing interviews on the web? And this is actually the most complex tense that exists in English, because the English verb equation is very comprehensive and includes all the various forms that a verb can take in English, which includes voices, the different types of sentences, and modals as well. So that is actually what we will be dealing with in the next video when we go over all the formulas that are included in the verb equation. That is to say, all the different ways to combine these operators one with another. And we will see how to create those formulas and how to use them. In our next videos, we will learn how to use the verb formulas, that is to say, how to apply the English verb equation. so as to get all your verb forms right. That's the point here. Okay, so I guess for now we are complete. I want to thank you for your attention. I'll see you in the next video. And in the meantime, I want to wish you all the best.